Welcome to Sports Connections with David Smale, a podcast that brings fun and interesting connections throughout sports. As an author and sports journalist, David has been interviewing fascinating people in sports for more than 40 years. Now here's your host, David Smale.
Every year, beginning in February, as soon as the Super Bowl is done, the sports world turns its collective attention to college basketball. In the days and weeks leading up to March Madness, teams are jockeying for position to get into the NCAA tournament or to improve their seeding. And fans want to know if their team is in and where it is likely to be seeded. The science of predicting those answers is a national phenomenon called bracketology. The concept began in the mid-1990s when the editors of the Blue Ribbon Yearbook, a college basketball publication, decided that they needed a better way to produce their tournament guide so they wouldn't have to do recaps for 80 or 90 schools. One of those editors, Joe Lunardi, a self-described hoops nerd, said he would figure out a system of predicting the field. In his first year, he picked 62, 63 of the 64 team field. So obviously, he was very good at doing that. Today, bracketology is a year-round obsession. As teams get eliminated from one year's tournament, Joe is figuring out how they'll look the next year. The day after that year's tournament is completed, he releases his projected bracket for the next year. Sane? No way. But for those of us who love college hoops, is it a must read? Absolutely. Joe, welcome to Sports Connections. I wanted to start, this is the first one we'll do. I wanted to start with a bang, and you're the bangest person I know, so welcome.
Well, that's a little bit sad if I'm first on your list, David, but I'm happy to be on, and I wish you all the best with this venture.
Well, thank you. And I will apologize to our viewers/listeners ahead of time for any background noise. The granddaughters, ages 5 and almost 3, are spending time with us this weekend, and they don't really want to take naps right now, so you might hear some objections coming through the walls. Don't worry, they're safe, and they really are enjoying spending time with Grandma and Grandpa, and I'm teaching them to tell Grandma that she's a bad mama jamma from the 1981 song. So if you hear some objections, that's what's going on. So, all right, well, let's get started. Joe, why don't you start with talking about your own storied sports history, how you became a fan, your days of rocking the rims in Philadelphia, and all of your athletic exploits.
Well, unfortunately, and maybe like a lot of members of the sports media, David, most of my athletic exploits have come as an observer and not as a participant. I was born terminally short and slow, and now I'm terminally short, slow, and old. So, my best sport is probably the 19th hole after 18 real ones on the golf course. And younger, my best sport was probably hockey. I was actually a pretty good skater, pretty fast, a little bit sneaky. And I grew up in Philadelphia during the Broad Street Bullies era. So it was hard not to like the NHL.
Sure.
And the Stanley Cup playoffs. In fact, I still love the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I think that, if not for the fact that I went to St. Joe's in Philadelphia and it was part of the Philadelphia Big Five, which in college basketball was and still is a thing. Mm-hmm. Villanova, Penn, Temple, LaSalle, and St. Joe's are pretty accomplished Division I programs within about a 10-mile radius of one another.
Yeah.
I might have been a hockey journalist. Who knows? But at St. Joe's, the best beat to get was men's basketball, and I was fortunate enough to have it for most of my time there. Experienced a lot of success as a program, and getting to chronicle it was a great experience. And when you go to one of the Big Five schools, you're really going to five in terms of access to teams and players, coaches, and great games. Mm-hmm. Because at that time, pretty much all the teams played their home games at one site called the Palestra on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. And for people not familiar, the Palestra is just one of those great old, it's a gym, not an arena.
Yeah.
And the best way I could describe it for folks in your neck of the woods would be, put Fog Allen on a Xerox machine, set it at 50%, and you have the Palestra. So you've got that intensity, only even smaller and more compressed, but with just the same old kind of, like I call it, the wood and popcorn feel.
Yeah.
And it's way the college basketball was meant to be experienced.
For
and
sure.
I was fortunate enough to go to college basketball doubleheaders all through college, and then after as a sports writer in the Philadelphia area, and that's where I kind of cut my teeth at all this.
Now, I will correct you in one thing. You are, I understand, a pretty decent golfer. I asked you one time.
I'm a bogey golfer.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I asked
you one time what you expected to be on your tombstone when that day comes, and you said you would like it to be author of a hole-in-one, but you realize it's probably going to say something about bracketology. So you have done something I have not done, that's for sure.
I did have a real hole-in-one on a real course with real people in my foursome. It was witnessed.
Was the windmill going by?
There was no windmill that day. The wind may have been behind us. It was about a 165 shot.
Ooh, very good.
And I'd like to say I hit it flush and high and perfect, and it spun right back into the hole. But actually, I hit it a little bit thin. It ran up the left side, was headed toward a greenside bunker, caught a ridge, turned back toward the hole, and we all saw it go in. And it says 1 on the scorecard, and that's all that matters.
That's right. That's right. Well, we're obviously here to talk about bracketology, so I would like you to start with some details, maybe not as much as you have in your book, hopefully not as much as you have in your book, but some details on how bracketology began and how it has grown.
Yeah, it began kind of as you described it in your introduction, David. The days that I spent editing the Blue Ribbon College Basketball Yearbook, and then later on kind of inaugurating a postseason tournament edition. This was an 80-page book. This was not an insignificant item that was produced, on the night that the bracket was released, Selection Sunday night, and we would print all night and ship all day Monday, so that those of us who were the what did you call us, hoop nerds?
Hoops nerds. You gave me that term, man.
Okay, well, that was dumb. And the hoop, let's call them hoopaholics.
There you go.
We would have that book in our grubby little hands in time for Thursday's tournament opener, and we would do 1,500, 2,000 words on every team in the field, stats, trends, predictions, everything, at a time when pre-internet, all you could get on most teams, if they were outside your natural geographic area, was like a little thumbnail in the newspaper, or like USA Today, Agate, right?
Yeah.
And we'll let our younger viewers go look up Agate. It's Agate. It's the little print that they do for box scores and race results.
Yeah.
Back when there were newspapers. And the difficulty of the book, in addition to the time crunch and the turnaround, was, get the bracket at whatever, 6:00 Sunday night, go to print, by midnight. Do we have all the teams covered? Right? Because there's always some surprises.
Right.
And we didn't really have a lot of time to start writing at 6:00, 64 teams.
Yeah.
So obviously we did the bulk of the work in the week and weekend leading up to Sunday. And that required kind of guessing at the field, if you will. And in the first year or two, the guy in charge, and let's just say his name was Joe. The guy in charge didn't do a very good job of forecasting the field. So A, we missed some teams, so we had to scramble. And B, we did way too many teams that never made the book. So, kind of scratching our head and figured out, A, it's going to cost less if we narrow this down.
Yeah.
And B, it'll be less work. So like many things in life, a combination of greed and laziness resulted in trying to figure out how to do it better, meaning do less work and spend less money doing it.
Yeah.
So, over the next couple of years, I did try to learn what went into kind of the bracket forecasting. Was there a method to the madness, if you will? And there was. It was less of a method then than it is today, but
Sure.
but there were still, organizational principles and procedures that the men's basketball committee and also the women's basketball committee used to, put together their respective tournament brackets. And most of it was, hidden away deep inside a file at the NCAA. And we were able over time to talk to people who'd been involved or been on the committee or knew people who'd been on the committee. And we were able to kind of narrow it down. Eventually, the principles and procedures were published on this wacky new thing called the internet. And we were able to, glean even more and get even better at being editors of our book. And being a quote unquote bracketologist was an unintended consequence of that process. No one remembers that now.
Right.
Because when it goes on TV, it says Joe Lunardi bracketologist, not Joe Lunardi, former fledgling book editor.
Right.
But I lost that kind of grounding, if you will. And it just evolved each year, a little bit more public exposure to the bracketology side. And, now it's a thing. And it's 25 years since the first public bracket. This guy I know in Kansas City wrote a great book. And here we are in the pinnacle of sports media on Sports Connections with Dave Smith.
All right, now you're getting me off track here. So the first
and what
year,
what day of Chiefsmas is it?
Well, the day we're recording this, it's the 5th day of Chiefsmas, and it's Super Bowl rings. So anyway, but when we release this, it is the day after the regular season ends. Chiefs are, I can say confidently, in late December, the Chiefs are the number 1 seed in the AFC, ready to run it back with back-to-back Super Bowl championships. So now that now that it's on record, we'll see how good that is. But anyway, getting back to my questions, the first year that it did go public, the first year, I think that was on ESPN.com. How successful were you in terms of the 64?
Yeah, it was on ESPN.com as early as 95 and 96, when ESPN.com was called something else.
Right.
It was an outsourced sports website, and ESPN Sports Zone, and most of the behind the scenes people were in Seattle. I was still filing some copy to a couple of editors in Bristol, of course, where ESPN's main network is located. By 2000, 2001, and then early 01, January of 01, it became its own, site within college basketball, its own bracketology site, as part of a legitimate ESPN digital publishing enterprise that was by that time pretty established.
Right.
you go back and look at some of those old web formats and you go, was that really state of the art at one time?
Yeah.
But it
for
was.
sure. So
Like black and white photos were state of the art at one time.
That's true. And hand drawings, what's it called on the caveman walls back when we were
hieroglyphics.
kids? Yeah. Okay. So anyway, how successful were you that first year? I think that's an important thing for people to recognize. You've got it down to such a science now.
Yeah, the first public year I missed a team. So 1 out of 64.
That's pretty good.
Now understand, the automatic bids are automatic. You're never going to get that wrong. At least in March. Now we start forecasting in the previous year, so there's plenty to get wrong. But it varied. But my average in 25 years is missing about a team and a half a year. A little less than that. I've had perfect years both in the 64 and the 65 team formats, which we had for a while, and then once in the 68 team format in 2013. The last year we had a tournament, I missed one. That was 2019. The year before that, I missed two. So only twice has it been more than two, and that was three. It's never been worse than that. I think it's reasonably rigorous academically from a peer review standpoint.
As we worked on your book, and in case people hadn't figured it out by now, I'm the schlump in Kansas City that helped him write his book. But as we researched that, I talked to an awful lot of people who are just amazed with how accurate you are, and some are not amazed. And so we didn't put them in. But are you like the very?
I don't know about that. I saw some quotes, Dave.
Yeah, there were some good ones. There were some good ones. Are you like the very successful coach who doesn't remember all the wins, but remembers every detail about the losses?
That's a question you didn't ask me before. No, I remember the wins too.
Okay.
But I definitely remember the misses, at least many of them, the ones that became, a thing publicly. Whether it was a miss in which the college basketball public thought the committee was in error and they took my side, which happens, or thought, the committee put a team in that I had spent, a month on TV saying wasn't going to make it. Those become pretty notable also because, there's a lot of, how do we say this nicely? Keyboard heroes out there who are able to, write and post and publish and promulgate, how smart they are and maybe how dumb we are. And they don't really remember the many, many, many times it might have been the other way around. But, that's fandom. And it's supposed to be like that. And if it wasn't for fans, nobody would care and we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. So I take it as, one of the perks to the job, to interact with the public.
And we'll get to to the way you handle critics in this interview. And I think it's absolutely hilarious. And you've got some really good stories. But my favorite story in the whole book is where we have the section on other people's comments. And so just talk about Shaka Smart when he was at VCU. And then I'll follow that up with my interview with Shaka Smart at the preseason Big 12 Media Day leading into the 2019-2020 season. So talk about Shaka Smart when he was the coach at VCU.
Well, the tournament went to 68 teams in 2011 with the introduction of the first four concept, and it's always been in Dayton. Mm-hmm. And to the University of Dayton's credit and the city of Dayton, they love their college basketball. They supported it pretty much no matter who was in the event. And if you've ever been to games there, and I've probably been to 20 or 30, it's just a great college basketball area.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2011, so the tournament expanded from 65 to 68, and that put 3 additional at-large teams in the field. Those 3 plus the one that would have been the last team in the previous format were playing games in Dayton, Ohio to get into the main bracket, the first 4 opening round. And VCU, at that time, not in the Atlantic 10, they were in the Colonial, got an at-large bid out of the Colonial and were deemed to be one of those last 4 in our term, right? Not theirs necessarily, but our term. So they're off to Dayton, and to be blunt, I did not have VCU in my field, and I was pretty, solid in offering that viewpoint to the national audience leading up to Selection Sunday. A friend and colleague in bracketology, Jerry Palm, had VCU in, said they were rock solid. So, here we go. Shaka Smart goes on TV and says, well, asked about my projections. Well, he's not the one we listened to, which of course was true that year. I'm sure it would have been different in another year had the projections been flipped. But I didn't think VCU had the resume to be one of those final teams.
Right.
Of course, they became one, and not only did they become one, in year 1 of the first 4, they won 5 games and went to the Final Four, beating a lot of big names along the way, including Kansas in the regional final, pretty handily, actually. They played their tails off. They got hot. They really got hot from the 3-point line after not being a great 3-point shooting team during the year. Shaka claimed at that time that he kept showing me to his team for motivation. When he got a gazillion-dollar extension after making the Final Four, I wrote to him and said, shouldn't I get a cut? Because, if I was so vital to your effort, but hey, they were great. And a year or 2 later, I'm trying to remember, after VCU joins the Atlantic 10, and now being affiliated with St. Joe's, I need to go there to broadcast games. And the first time I go to VCU with St. Joe's, I had been there to broadcast games earlier before they were a Final Four school. Like, what do they call those big fat heads, right, in the end zones?
Yeah.
They got my head up there with big red X's through them. And I thought, man, they're taking this a little seriously.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like I said they stunk.
Right.
I just said they were team number 69, not team number 68.
Yeah.
But it becomes a whole. If they were team number 68, went to Dayton and lost by 20, all would have gone away quickly.
Right.
But with each passing round, of course, the middle finger extended back in the direction of a certain bracketologist got longer, and it happens. It wasn't the first time, and I'm sure it's not the last.
And I remember you telling me that he was interviewed when they reached either the interviews leading up to the Final Four, on the stage after winning the regional or whatever. He was interviewed about your projection, and he said, I hope Lunardi keeps us out of his bracket all the time because it's good luck, or something to that effect. Okay.
Yes. It was a rare moment of graciousness from coaches who tend not to be when they disagree.
All All right. So with that in mind, I want to read you the lengthy quote that he told me at the preseason Big 12 Media Day, which is in the book to Joe's credit. I said, what do you think of bracketology? And Shaka Smart, now the Texas head coach, says, honestly, I don't put any thought into it. That's it.
Okay.
And
well, he must have put enough thought in it to show his team back in 2011. So we'll leave it at that.
And I've shared with you, we've got quote after quote after quote of people saying Joe's good for college basketball. Joe does a great job, stuff like that. And right in the middle of it is that quote. And I laugh every single time I look at the proofs. And I'm reading the one before it is Bill Self talking about what a great guy is and Joe is. And then here's Shaka Smart. And I'm reading it. My wife will come in. You okay? Yeah, I'm just reading Shaka Smart's quote again because it's just, it is so funny.
David, I laugh whenever you laugh at it.
Yeah. Right. Well, obviously you have your critics. And we all do. If we do our job well, there are going to be people who disagree with us. So I don't think having critics is a mark against us. What is your response to people who differ with your opinion? And I think the first thing you have to tell them is it's not your opinion of who should be in, it's who you think the committee is going to be in.
Yeah, and that's a bit of a nuance that gets lost in a lot of cases. Yeah. And that's okay. I get it. But yes, it should be stated for the record, particularly, my final projections in March. If I'm doing my job right, I'm listing what I think the committee is going to do, not how I would vote. And sometimes they're the same. Most times they're not. Because the truth is, that's my job.
Yeah.
Is to forecast the tournament, not to offer my opinion as a committee member.
Right.
Anytime you watch a game or a sportscast or read a column, people in college basketball are offering you what they would do.
Right.
Right. Like that. I have a different job than that. And some of the mistakes, many of the mistakes that I've made over the years, meaning, my 1.5 misses a year, that have been because it's human nature, right? To let your own viewpoints seep into anything, right? Like I just changed the channels on my television set and I chose this newscast instead of that newscast,
right?
Because I kind of feel a little bit like they do.
Yeah.
Right. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. And it's hard after, observing and crunching numbers and following the committee's procedures to the letter for 5 months to not have some opinions.
Right.
Like if not, just let a machine do it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but I try to tell myself selection Saturday night, okay, like these borderline calls that I've made, whether it be for a top seed or a team on the bubble, like, is that what I think? And does that differ from what they, as a group of 10 independent observers, might think? And I've made tweaks at the last minute that have generally worked out for the best by taking that deep breath.
And the very first time I interviewed you was for a story in the Final Four program before we ever started working on the book. You told me something that has stuck with me is as you evaluate a team, you look at it through the lens of the committee, and you said something that will stick with me. I would put my own mother in the NIT if she played a soft schedule. So you're looking at the criteria that they look at.
Yeah, and look, it's a moving target what they look at.
Yeah.
Not just year to year, but team to team.
Yeah.
And it almost has to be because what coaches and media and athletic administrators and the like will say is, well, tell us what the one thing is that we should do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that would be great if it were so. But you're a big baseball fan. I love baseball. Well, I would say, is there one thing that makes for a winning or World Series baseball team? No, you got to have some pitching, you got to have some hitting, you got to have some luck, you got to catch the ball, blah, blah, blah. You got to get hot at the right time. And, it's nice when the ball bounces fair. It's just a key moment.
Yeah.
And what I would say is when you're evaluating, a Kansas at the top of the Big 12 historically, and, East Tennessee State at 30-2 in the Southern Conference, let's say, well, they're not starting from the same place on the track
Right.
when the starter's pistol goes off.
Right.
So, East Tennessee State plays a much different schedule. Kansas can, buy a half dozen home game wins before the season even starts. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It just is.
Right.
So you're not evaluating string beans and carrots the same way. And the committee has to try and find that path, and that's a human element. It's not computer driven. Some think it should be. And, that would save me a lot of late nights if that were so. And I'd probably need to find another line of work at this point.
But if it was computer generated,
you're never going to get away with the committee.
Let me interrupt you for a second here, because if it was computer generated, you'd have all the complaints that we had with the selections of the Gold Glove winners in Major League Baseball this year, strictly based on the statistics, the fielding percentage, and there was a combination of things, but not looking at the eyeball. You're not using the eyeball. And because there were some guys who just were absolutely the best at their position, but their numbers didn't measure up. And so they weren't even in the finalist list, much less selected. So there are elements to that. If we just use computers, people would be complaining about that as well, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And here's what I would say to that. And I tend to be a data driven bracketologist more than the quote unquote eye test person, much more so than an eye test person. But, and this is a huge but, almost every measuring system in any endeavor has outliers, right? Yeah. They're not perfect.
Yeah.
Like there might be 100 winter storms forecast in a given year in the Midwest. And, 95 times out of 100, the snow accumulation forecast is, pretty much on target. Mm-hmm. And maybe 5% of the time they miss by a foot, or it doesn't snow at all.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that falls into the category of bleep happens. Okay. And bleep happens at everything in our lives, including the metrics of our favorite sports, college basketball in this case. And what I would say, I view my job and the committees, they don't use these words, but it is what they're doing essentially, is they're trying to identify the outliers and jigger the list accordingly.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're trying to find the Gold Glover who, covers more ground in center field than the numbers suggest.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's okay. Like there might be 5 a year, there might be 25 a year. You just look at the numbers and you go, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Right? Like here you go. I was just reading the other day that the lifetime average for Albert Pujols has fallen below 300. He's like 299, 555, something like that. All right. But and I know that Albert Pujols is a 300 hitter.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because we watched them for 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So, it's a numerical accident that this is now in his column.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Well, like a reasonably observant human being can go, I got it, and adjust the list in their mind.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why we need a human element, and that's why I wouldn't get rid of the committee.
Yeah.
The reason why the committee's not going anywhere is because, like it or not, the NCAA is also a political process. And okay, so are most things in life.
Okay. I want to transition a little bit. You're wearing your St. Joseph University Hawks shirt proudly today. I want you to talk a little bit about your career with St. Joseph's University and how the university not only allowed you to do this, but encouraged you to do this.
Yeah, well, I come from a long line of Hawks. My dad and my two older brothers went to what was then St. Joseph's College. It became a university when I was there. Uh, no doubt because of admitting me and raising the academic profile of the entire institution. And I was a solid almost cum laude. And
How do you say almost in Latin?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, most people still don't know this, but my 30+ year career at St. Joe's was not in athletics.
Right.
It was in university communications and marketing, and I was working, quote unquote, on the other side of the street with admissions and alumni and fundraising and promotion, and a lot of time in my later years with the office of the president, basically in fronting the institution in good times and bad, and being a spokesperson. The basketball stuff was just broadcasting games on the side because they were on campus and I was a basketball guy.
Yeah.
And I filled in for someone once on the radio because it snowed one night more than expected, an outlier.
Yeah.
And the guy who was supposed to be the color man couldn't get there. And I guess, I was Lou Gehrig and he was Wally Pipp. And I mostly stayed on and eventually came to broadcast 1,000 games at St. Joe's. And again, like covering the Big Five as a student, being a broadcaster, for a program that would have its runs nationally from time to time, I had an opportunity to kind of broaden my network and travel and interact with, media and broadcasters and programs from all over the country. I've been to the Final Four and I've been to Maui and I've been every place in between. And that just kind of gave me even greater personal insight into how the sport works and made me a better blue ribbon, writer and editor, and eventually a better ESPN person. And, I hope that it was as good for St. Joe's as it was for me, to have somebody from the institution who doesn't shy away from being from the institution, have a little bit of a national presence. It's not a huge university. So, it's not like we have, 100 people or 1,000 graduates with a national profile. And then, a couple of years ago when I finally left St. Joe's to do this basketball thing mostly full time, our kids were grown, and it's terrible to say I didn't need the tuition benefit anymore. And I reached a certain age that begins with a new number and wanted to frankly work less and do this other thing more because it's my passion, and I was fortunate enough financially to be able to make that move. And other than this COVID thing, it's really worked out pretty well.
Yeah. I want to combine the last two, the previous two questions about your critics and about St. Joe's. And one of my favorite stories in the book was about the young man when you were doing ESPN chat who thought you were full of it, and you didn't, and suggested you didn't know anything about St. Joe. So tell that story.
It starts with having a really good team that, generates the kind of national attention typically afforded the blue bloods of the sport. Back in the 03-04 season, the Hawks were, a top 5 team,
Right.
undefeated in the regular season. Wooden Award winner Jameer Nelson, eventually became number 1 ranked team heading into the NCAA tournament, and a 1 seed, finished 30-2, went to the Elite 8 by all any rational reason, as great a year as anybody can have, short of winning it all. And for a school like St. Joe's, that is essentially winning it all.
Right.
Because you look down the list of champions in the modern year, at least, and there aren't really any schools that look like that.
Right.
So this was about midway through the year, and some people had already, made St. Joe's a number 1 seed in their forecasts, and I was hedging as a 2 or a 3 seed, probably a 2, if I go back and look, for the obvious reason. I didn't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
Right. That homer.
Yeah.
If they were going to be a 1 seed, they were really going to have to earn it. And I wasn't going to be the first one to say it.
Yeah.
At least then. Now I would, because, I'm no longer an employee of the institution, and at least not a full-time employee. I'm still broadcasting games. I have to think that in the 15 or 16 intervening years, like Jay Billis and Jay Williams were great players at Duke, and everybody knows them as Duke people, but people assume that they can be neutral analysts.
Yeah.
Right. I'd like to think that I've reached that level also.
Yeah.
And if not, well, too bad, because I am.
Yeah.
I've never put St. Joe's in the tournament when they shouldn't have been. Never had them wrong on the bubble.
Right.
In fact, I don't even think I've ever missed on St. Joe's seed, but I'd have to check.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so that year, I was a little late, by a week or 2 in elevating St. Joe's to the top line and doing my live chat one Friday afternoon. Some St. Joe's student comes after me on the chat, oh, you only care about Duke, you only care about the big boys, blah, 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 blah. Many levels, this kid was probably 150 yards away in a dorm room while I was sitting in my office on City Line Avenue. So I suggested he wanted to discuss meet in front of the library in a half hour. And that totally, threw him for a loop. But we went, we kissed and made up, and, I'm like, yeah, I kind of get it. And at that point, I've probably seen maybe 800 more St. Joe's games than you have. So why don't you let me be the bracketologist?
Yeah. And didn't he question whether he even knew who Jameer Nelson was? And
yeah,
you had to say,
he did.
Well, at the last game I broadcast, I told it he had this many points or whatever. So
yeah, we probably interviewed him as the star of the game because he rarely had good games.
Yeah.
So we never had him all.
All right. The other humorous story, and I told you early on, the very first time I interviewed you, I told you I appreciated your humility and your humor, and you asked me to call your wife and tell her that. But yeah. One of my favorite stories in the book is near the end of it, and you were in a Applebee's or a Outback Steakhouse or something. You happen to be able to get away from the studio. You pre-recorded a halftime segment, and you actually got to leave the building and go get something to eat. So tell us that story.
Yeah, it doesn't always happen when I'm up in Bristol. In fact, it rarely happens that once if it's the weeknight, once you dive in, get in at 5 or 6 before the games come on at 7, that you can sneak out. It's just,
yeah,
our job is to be there in case something happens,
right,
and to go on and talk about it. But for whatever the combination of analysts was on this given night, there was a pre-recorded halftime, and I had an hour. like during the second half of the first game and the first half of the next game to run out, or they didn't need me for fill in between, whatever it was. I got to run out. I'm sitting there. It is an Outback in Southington, and you know, I hate to sit in a restaurant. I go there because I hate to sit in a restaurant at a table by myself. But like if you can sit at the bar and watch the game or whatever's on it, okay, that's different. And you can order the full menu, but that's not important. I'm sitting there, I'm eating this, the game switches to this pre-recorded thing we'd done for that halftime. And I forget who I was even on with. But it doesn't matter. The guy eating next to me, he's looking at the TV and he's looking at me and he's looking at the TV and he's looking at me. And he starts to talk, and I said to me, I'm like, oh yeah. I said, that's my twin brother. We don't like him either. Or something to that effect. Like, oh, we think he's an arrogant, I don't know what I said. And then he goes, he's like, yeah, he thinks a know-it-all. What does he know about basketball? Blah, 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 blah. And, I just keep on eating and maybe ordered another ginger ale. And as I'm leaving, a short time later, I hand him my card because he handed, his cards like, Doug Griffith shower curtain rings or, whatever it was. And, and he looks and he goes, oh, I'm so. And I'm like, hey, easy, Frank. It was all good fun. I thought it was hysterical. But yes, it really happened.
That's again, when I was reading proofs, I'm laughing out loud as I'm reading. So
let's hope some people, buy it to laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Before we get too much further, I want you to talk about your Twitter tournament. This, the reason you did it, your trepidations with doing it. Would anybody be interested in stuff? And so we're talking about a Twitter tournament for the 2020 tournament that didn't happen.
Right. I mean, look, in the grand scheme of things, the absence of 67 basketball games is a pretty small item,
right,
in the history of the human race, right? For people who love college basketball, to have the tournament pulled out from under them, kind of literally 2 days, 3 days before you're going to get that magical bracket in your hand, was, crime and punishment all rolled into one.
Yeah.
And like everyone, at the end of the day, I'm just a fan, right? Like, I like this. It is enjoyment, leisure, entertainment, etc. This sounds overly dramatic. I think I was grieving, just like a lot of people were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something lost that matters.
Yeah.
Not knowing, having any way to know the extent and level and magnitude of real loss that would occur over the next, 9 months to a year, whatever. So I thought, okay, well, selection Sunday night at 6:00, everybody's asked, like, Joe, where's your bracket? So I thought, I'll do one. And then I thought, well, maybe I should kind of, at the time each game would be tipped, maybe I should tweet something about what I think. And I did it for the first few games, the first 4, and then the first weekend. And that Sunday night, like, I started to get responses. Where did he go? Like, what's next? Like, we want the tournament. We want this back. Because I was kind of following along with some storylines that might have played out with, periodic upsets thrown in and just the kind of fun that comes along with the tournament, right? I didn't pick all the favorites, didn't pick all the 1 seeds. I didn't, advance all the obvious contenders, because that never happens.
Yeah.
And I tried to go almost proportionally what does happen. Like, this is the average place that 1 seeds go down. So I made sure that 1 happened, et cetera. This is about the number of double-digit seeds that advance, in the first couple rounds. So I did that as well, all the way up through and through the conclusion of the Final Four. And for the record, Michigan State beat Florida State for the national championship. That never happened.
Yeah, and a couple of things that intrigued me when you told me this story. First of all, was the fact that you've got 240,000 Twitter followers. So I long for that.
You're well on your way, David.
Yeah, I'm like multiple 100,000 or a factor of 100,000 of that. So I've got 24 so far, but we're growing.
Wow,
you're growing. But
it's just a question of zeros.
Yeah, exactly. Zeros, meaningless, right? But the other thing is that you got reactions from not only fans but from coaches and from universities. I don't remember who it was that you had losing to Duke by 40 in the first round, but their sports information department starts tweeting about how wrong you are because they've always played Duke well. It's like, this is, first of all, this is a fake tournament. Secondly,
right. Like they're arguing about a game that never happened.
Yeah.
Never even listed to happen.
Yeah.
It was like a 3-14, I guess, or 2-15 Duke, Belmont, and Greensboro. And, if you look at the history of Duke, when it gets to play NCAA games in its backyard, it's usually pretty ugly for the underdog.
Yeah.
Sure, they've been upset a number of times, but, they've also made a whole lot of Final Fours. And yes, Belmont has played Duke close. And, oh, well, I didn't think of that at the time. And, I guess when I get the Belmont Media Guide and it's got that tournament loss in there with a picture of my head with an X through it, I'll know that they really took it to heart.
It's just so amazing to me, though, that this was a fake tournament and people had real reactions, both to who was selected, who was not selected, who beat whom, how it happened. I mean, you talked about St. Mary's College lost a regular season game in triple overtime when a goaltending call wasn't called. This really did happen. So in your tournament, you had them winning a triple overtime game when a goaltending call was called and things like that. So you had fun with it.
Why not?
But there were real reactions to a fake tournament, and that tells me people really care about college basketball.
Yeah, and it would be like complaining about how a novel ends, right? The key word being fiction.
Yes.
Right? And not whatever the opposite of fiction is, non-fiction.
Yeah.
Reality.
Yeah, yeah.
Like people, this is for fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, I appreciate their passion.
And that's good. That's a good position to be in. And then one other thing about bracketology, and we're getting close to the end here, but one other thing that bracketology has helped you do, besides predicting who's in, you understand why or why not they're in, or why or why not they should be in, or whatever. And that's led to some consulting work for coaches, for universities on scheduling. Just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's not a huge thing. It's not something I really actively market.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose you could view that as a little bit of a conflict of interest if it went in that direction. But, if a school or a coach or an AD or a league office calls in June and says, hey, Smale State has a chance to play in the, coaches versus cancer season tip-off in Brooklyn with, I don't know, Wisconsin, Auburn, and Richmond. Is that good for us?
Yeah.
If we're trying to build a consideration for a possible NCAA bid, in particular an NCAA at-large bid, or should we go get a couple cupcakes on the schedule instead?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, and the response usually is, well, what's the rest of your schedule like? Right? Because you can't really answer the question in a vacuum. like if all they're playing are 25 other cupcakes, well, then they better go get some beef,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas if they're already playing, the Lakers, the Celtics, and the Heat, then, maybe we want to get a couple wins so that the coach keeps his job,
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's informal. But I, you can't do this for as long as we haven't not make some friends along the way.
Yeah.
Who get your number and want to know what you think. And if somebody, is ever, if they want to send me a hat or a shirt or a golf date at the coach's club for helping them with their schedule, they know where to find me.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. One of my favorite quotes in the whole book, and you got this from your dad, is this: behind every successful man is a surprised woman. So talk about Pam and your girls.
Well, yeah, I have 3, not counting the dog.
And you've admitted that they're all smarter than you, including the dog.
Well, I think it's 50-50 on Sam. He's relatively new to the picture, quarantine dog.
Okay.
So he hasn't had his first tournament yet. So it's, he hasn't been able to beat me in the pool. When that happens, then I'll be 5th in the house instead of 4th.
Okay.
But yeah, Pam and I've been together, married in 1985, 35 years. My dad would say that the first 35 years are the hardest, and he would always defer to our mom. And I understand that the incredible support that I've been given and the flexibility to go out and chase that little orange ball, not that little, bouncing orange ball, all winter, every year, when, I could have been home more. I probably could have had it for most of the years, a more well-compensated career, etc. So I'm appreciative of that. And then you go and you have children, and now they're grown, and that keeps you humble, because, here I am thinking I'm a big deal to be on Sports Center, and it was more important to them if I took them to the Lizzie McGuire movie. So that's okay.
Yeah.
I wanted a point guard, and I got 2 singers and dancers and performers and wonderful people. And, you could do a lot worse.
Yeah. And I would do want you to give credit to your brothers and your parents and the impact another, and I keep referring to quotes from your book. Your dad would have said, I can't believe they're paying him to talk on TV. We would have paid more to get him to shut up. But you had great support from your family.
Yes. And my dad in particular has been gone a long time, and certainly before all the TV stuff came along. And he absolutely would have said, I can't believe they're paying him to talk. Just shut up. Yeah. And my mom, Stetta Z, and my Italian grandmother, I get it. And in my house, I was kind of shy. We've got some outgoing people.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm telling you, you'd be surprised.
All right. We've talked about the book, and what we will do on the video is we'll have the link to Triumph Books, who is publishing the book. It'll be out March 1st, just in time for the tournament. And for those listening, just Google search Joe Lunardi, Triumph Books, and you'll be able to find the link. It's Triumph Books. Or if you really can't figure that out, you can go to my website, davidsmailbooks.com, and I have a link to the Triumph Books website, and you can do that. But just real quickly, Joe, talk about, I remember when I first interviewed you for the Final Four program story, and it just kept sticking in my head. I need to get back with this guy and talk about a book. And I remember, emailing you and say, can we talk again? And I called you and I said, have you ever thought about doing a book? And you said, yeah, I've been approached dozens of times. And I said, who ended up writing it? And you said, nobody. I didn't think it was something that was marketable. And I said, well, guess what? We're going to change that. I was probably a little pushy, just talk about the process.
No.
All right, now my family's going to start chiming in here, but talk about the process of putting all these thoughts into book form, because now that it's written, you can't deny it. You can't be taken out of context.
Yeah, only Charles Barkley gets misquoted in his own book, right?
Exactly.
Wasn't that a thing once? I didn't throw that guy through a plate glass window. I was misquoted. Knowing Charles a little bit, I can see it. Yeah, I think the real thing, I don't want to like exhibit false modesty.
Right.
Of course it would be cool to do a book. I think it was more a question of timing. It was after I, semi-retired from St. Joe's in 2019 that I guess I felt like I just had more space in my life, in my work life, in just my head, and whatever direction was going to come next in my career. And you and I hit it off. I came out for a visit before we really got started. We only done chapter or two at that point. And what you brought to the table, I wouldn't say that you were pushy. I would say that you were insistent that this was a good idea in a very professional and nice way. And you kept me / us, mostly me, on task for something that I probably would not have done on my own. And you organized the story, you organized me, and you organized the material in a way that was consumable. And then you did the really hard thing of stepping back then and letting me make it sound like me. In that, I think it really was a collaboration that we can both be proud of. I mean, you've done this 20 some times. I've done it once, so you'd really be more to judge the process. But I think the product exceeds my expectations, and I guess we'll leave the final judgment up to the New York Times bestseller list. I don't know why they wouldn't include it.
Yeah.
Because in my mind and yours too, I'm sure the book is a #1 seed, and I ultimately enjoyed it very much.
Well, I enjoyed it as well. I wasn't fishing for a compliment. I was more looking for your thoughts about the process of doing it. But I had as much fun as I have had with any of the books, including one I did on the history of the Kansas City Chiefs franchise, which still gets my blood going today. So
really,
yeah.
So we came down to see your shirt. There we go.
Surprise. All right, let's wrap up with this. And I thought we would have a 3 or 4 page chapter to conclude the book, and it ended up being one of our longer chapters. What's the future of bracketology?
Well, hopefully the future includes the return to somewhat normalcy in life and in college basketball. Because, I mean, let's be honest, we can say that we know how this season's going to end, but we don't.
Right.
We can say that we know how the NCAA tournament is going to be comprised, but we don't. And we can say that there's going to be a Final Four and a national champion, but we don't know that either.
Yeah.
So I look forward to just kind of basically making do for the balance of 2021, and hopefully having some semblance of return to the normal cycle of our sport by let's say the fall of 21 heading into the 21-22 season. The sport is clearly being dominated by the football powers. I don't think that's necessarily for the better for basketball, but I think it's probably inevitable. And I just hope that we don't lose the soul of college basketball by arranging conferences, schedules, television alliances, and our postseason in a way that so favors the football schools that we lose what has made basketball special. I've proposed some, I think, reasonable, modest ways in which that can be addressed going forward. And all I'll say is it's in chapter 10.
All right, well, my friend, it has been a pleasure as always. I always walk away from our conversations. They're not always on video, but I always walk away from them laughing, and I'll go downstairs and tell Tammy, you won't believe what Joe said this time, and she'll say, yeah, I believe it. But it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for being my bangest guest so far.
Well, let's hear it for you and for Sports Connections.
Thanks for listening to Sports Connections with David Smale. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and rate the show from your favorite podcast platform. You can learn more about David Smale and his work by visiting davidsmalebooks.com. Don't forget to join us weekly for new episodes. Until next time.